I think everyone's noticed that Britain's backing of Israel has been, shall we say, less less fulsome than it was maybe on October the 7th. The rhetoric that the government is using is much more sceptical about Israel, much more sceptical about its Prime Minister as well. And I think this is linked to the fact that David Cameron is now the Foreign Secretary. Well, today, relations between Britain and Israel, I would say, reached a new low after the killing of 7 aid workers, 3 of them British citizens, by an IDF drone. Now, obviously, we don't know all the details of exactly what happened there, but obviously it's a tragedy. And it will mean that it will make it even more difficult for aid workers to get aid into Gaza. It's much needed, as we all know. The British government has made its views on this tragedy very, very clear. The Foreign Secretary called his Israeli counterpart, and the Deputy Foreign Secretary, Andrew Mitchell, summoned Zippy Hotovely, Israel's ambassador to the UK, to a meeting at the Foreign Office. Now, David Cameron said after his call with the Israeli Foreign Minister, Israel must urgently explain how this happened and make major changes to ensure safety of aid workers on the ground. Andrew Mitchell, he released what is called a punchy statement. He said he set out the government's unequivocal condemnation of the appalling killing of 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers, including 3 British nationals. I requested a quick and transparent investigation shared with the international community and full accountability. So my question to you is this. How can we make it safer for aid workers in Gaza? What is Israel's responsibility here? And how can it be best monitored? 0345 6060 973. Gregg Carlstrom joins me, Middle East correspondent for The Economist. Gregg, very good evening to you. Take us through the events of the day and what exactly happened in this drone attack.
We still don't have an official explanation from the Israeli army, but the story that has come out so far from army sources and people in the defense ministry in Israel is that this convoy of 3 cars had left a warehouse in northern Gaza where World Central Kitchen was bringing aid in by ship from Cyprus. These 3 cars left the warehouse. The first one was targeted by an Israeli drone, which fired a missile at it. The car was damaged. People in the second car tried to pull out the survivors. The second car was then subsequently struck. And then about a kilometer down the road, the third car was struck as well. So this drone fired 3 missiles in succession at 3 different cars in the convoy, killing the 7 aid workers.
Now, I read somewhere that the organisation had actually liaised with the IDF, and the IDF knew where these cars were going and the route that they were taking. Is that true?
It is true. World Central Kitchen has been one of the groups over the past few months that the Israelis have actually been happy to work with. They've been trying to minimize the role of UNRWA, the UN agency that aids Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere, and they've been trying to focus on working with NGOs to provide aid instead of the UN in Gaza. World Central Kitchen was one of them, to the point where they were given permission by the Israeli military to bring in aid by sea, something that Israel had not allowed to happen for about 2 decades in Gaza. But they coordinated that with World Central Kitchen, and they were coordinating all of the group's movements. So as they were driving along this coastal road in Gaza City, they had run that by the Israeli army in advance. They knew which cars were going to be traveling, when, what road they were going to take. It was all meant to be coordinated.
Which begs the question, how on earth did this happen? If they... some people are saying, well, this was clearly a deliberate attack. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, called it a tragedy and, issued a sort of semi-apology, even though he did add the phrase, but of course these things happen in wars, if that somehow justified it. People are going to... those who want to think ill of Israel and its government, they've been given a very good excuse today, haven't they?
Sure, and this was a deliberate attack, certainly in the sense that they meant to target this convoy. This wasn't one errant missile. This wasn't an explosion 100 meters away that caused some collateral damage. There's been some reporting in the Israeli media today that they had been monitoring this warehouse before the convoy departed, and they had seen an armed man driving into the warehouse on a truck, and they meant to target this armed man. Whether or not that would justify targeting a convoy that had seven aid workers in it is one question, but that armed man wasn't even in the convoy in the end. The truck that he was supposedly riding in was not part of this three-car convoy. So there was absolutely no justification for this attack based on everything that we know so far.
And it hasn't done anything to help British-Israeli relations, which have been on the slide, I think it's fair to say, for some time. The statement made by David Cameron and Andrew Mitchell today, going, I would say, beyond what the diplomatic norms are.
It is, absolutely. And not just Britain, but if you look at the nationalities of these aid workers who were killed, you have three British citizens, one Australian, one American Canadian dual citizen. These are people from countries that have been, for the past 6 months, some of Israel's closest allies, and among the handful of countries that are still defending Israel's conduct in Gaza, defending the war in Gaza. This is now going to do damage to Israel's reputation with a number of key Western allies who, as you say, were already frustrated about the insufficient humanitarian aid in Gaza, about the Israeli army's utter lack of interest in trying to protect civilians in Gaza. This has now added even more strain to these already strained relationships.
Greg, thank you very much. That's Greg Carlstrom, Middle East correspondent for The Economist. Richard Makepeace joins me now, trustee of the charity Medical Aid for Palestinians. He's a former British Consul General to Jerusalem. Richard, good evening to you. Your immediate reaction to the events of the day, and particularly that of the British government?
Well, I mean, it's an absolutely appalling event, but it is not something new, I'm afraid. Medical Aid for Palestinians also had a location targeted, which was notified to the Israeli authorities, where we were housing a group of brave volunteers who were part of a joint medical team mounted by us and by International Rescue. By the grace of God, nobody was killed. There were some minor injuries. But as far as we could judge, this was a targeted attack. And there's been no explanation from the Israelis about it. And I think, as the UN have pointed out, this just shows that this is an appalling situation for humanitarians. These deaths bring to more than 200 the number of humanitarian workers who've been killed. And in many cases, these appear to have been targeted attacks. This is not some militia unable, not having the intelligence or the weaponry or the expertise to know a location or to avoid it. This is a modern army with the latest kit, and frankly, it's inexcusable.
What can be done to ensure that it doesn't happen again? Because in the end, that's surely got to be the aim of everybody involved.
Well, I think certainly if the Haaretz report, which was referred to before, is true, i.e. that it was thought justified to target a humanitarian convoy because of the possibility of somebody with a weapon, unknown, being somewhere near, then there has to be a complete change of heart by the Israeli government. And the IDF have to be told that they must be much more careful and that they are basically putting Israel in a very vulnerable position, not just politically, but under international law.
Do you think, though, there is the willingness to recognise that they got this totally wrong and to take measures to ensure that it can't happen again?
Well, let's hope that let's trust that hope can triumph over experience. But I'm afraid the Israelis have a very poor reputation over the course of this war, which has seen absolutely unprecedented targeting of humanitarians to an extent that more have been killed in Gaza than in any conflict, according to the UN, over a 1-year period.
What's the one thing you'd like to hear from the Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, I would like to hear that there was a serious mistake, and this is not just one mistake, this is hundreds of mistakes they've made since the beginning of this conflict, that there is going to be a complete change of operational activity, and they will make clear to their commanders and their officers in the IDF that if they commit crimes such as this, they will be held to account. I mean, this war seems to be not just a war against Gaza, but a war against humanity.
What did you make of Netanyahu's comment where he said, well, of course, these things happen in war? I mean, he has got a point to the extent that there is always collateral damage. If you target a building, you could hit the building next door. But you can't really put this under the heading of collateral damage, can you?
No, absolutely not. And I mean, there's a difference between everything is about proportionality. You know, there's a difference between, if you like, genuine collateral damage and a war in which, the entire population of Gaza have been targeted, whether through denying them safe drinking water, denying them for food, the destruction of more than half the housing stock, I think, in Gaza, most of the hospitals. This is an absolutely unprecedented situation. And Prime Minister Netanyahu needs to own up to the fact that he's responsible for this and understands his need to do something about it.